A stolen promise. When her father was accused of treason, Lady Isolde of Ashenmere had only one choice: seek the aid of Lord Rhys Montrose, the warlord who had once laid siege to their lands. He smirked as he leaned against the stone wall. "You ask for my mercy, my lady," he murmured. "But tell me, what will you offer in return?" Chapter 1. The accusation of treason. The parchment felt like ice in Isolde's hands, the royal seal a cruel mockery of justice. Her father, Lord Alaric of Ashenmere, a man whose loyalty to the crown had been unwavering, stood accused of treason. The words swam before her eyes, blurring into a single, terrifying truth. Her world was collapsing. The great hall of Ashenmere, usually a place of warmth and boisterous laughter, felt cold and cavernous, the tapestries depicting scenes of ancient battles seeming to watch her with silent accusation. Lady Isolde was no stranger to hardship. The death of her mother, 5 years past, had left a void in her heart, a wound that only time had begun to scab over. But this was a different kind of pain, a sharp, searing betrayal that threatened to consume everything she held dear. Her father, a man of granite strength and unwavering principle, was now a prisoner in the king's dungeons, his fate hanging precariously in the balance. The messenger, a grim-faced man in the king's livery, had departed as swiftly as he had arrived, leaving behind a silence thick with dread. Isolde's younger brother, Elric, stood beside her, his face pale, his usually bright eyes clouded with fear. He was but 15, too young to shoulder the burden of their father's disgrace, too young to understand the intricate web of courtly intrigue that had ensnared them. "Isolde," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What are we to do?" She forced herself to meet his gaze, to project a strength she did not feel. "We will fight, Elric. We will prove father's innocence." But even as the words left her lips, a chilling doubt crept into her heart. How could they, a relatively minor house, stand against the might of the king and the whispers of powerful enemies? The accusation itself was ludicrous. Lord Alaric, a veteran of countless campaigns, a man who had bled for the crown, accused of conspiring with the northern rebels. The very notion was absurd, yet the evidence, the messenger had claimed, was irrefutable. A forged letter, bearing her father's seal, outlining a plot to assassinate the king. Isolde knew, with a certainty that burned in her soul, that her father was innocent, but knowing it and proving it were two vastly different things. She crushed the parchment in her fist, the sharp edges digging into her palm. She would not weep. Not yet. Tears were a luxury she could not afford. She needed to think, to plan, to find a way to save her father before it was too late. The king's justice was swift and brutal. The trial was scheduled for the next full moon, barely a fortnight away. Isolde paced the length of the hall, her mind racing. She considered their allies, the neighboring lords who owed fealty to Ashenmere. But most were weak, their loyalty fickle, easily swayed by the winds of royal favor. To openly support a man accused of treason would be to invite the king's wrath upon themselves. She could not, in good conscience, ask them to risk their own lives and lands for her father's sake. A memory surfaced, unbidden and unwelcome. A memory of fire and steel, of a siege that had nearly brought Ashenmere to its knees, years ago. A memory of a man, a warlord, whose ruthlessness was legendary. Lord Rhys Montrose. The Beast of Blackwood, they called him. He had been their enemy then, a young, ambitious lord seeking to expand his territory. He had besieged Ashenmere for months, his forces relentless, his determination unwavering. Only a desperate plea from Isolde, a young girl barely past her first flowering, had convinced him to spare the castle and its inhabitants. She remembered his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, piercing and cold, yet holding a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Respect, perhaps? Or something darker, something that sent a shiver down her spine even now. He had granted her plea, but not without a price. A hefty tribute, a portion of Ashenmere's lands, and a promise of future cooperation. Now, years later, Montrose was one of the most powerful lords in the realm, his influence extending even to the royal court. He was known for his cunning, his military prowess, and his impartiality. He was not a man to be trifled with, but he was also not a man known for cruelty's sake. He was a pragmatist, a survivor. A desperate thought, a sliver of hope, pierced through Isolde's despair. Could she appeal to him again? Could she, the daughter of the man he had once sought to conquer, ask for his help? The very idea was galling, a bitter pill to swallow. But her father's life was at stake. She would swallow any pride, endure any humiliation, if it meant saving him. She turned to Elric, her voice firm despite the turmoil within. "Send a rider to Blackwood. Tell Lord Montrose that I request an audience. Tell him it is a matter of life and death." Elric stared at her, aghast. "Montrose? But he's the beast." "He is also our only hope," Isolde said, her voice unwavering. "Go, Elric, and pray that he remembers a young girl's plea from long ago." As Elric hurried away, Isolde walked to the window, gazing out at the rolling hills of Ashenmere, their familiar beauty now tinged with a sense of foreboding. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the land. She knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with peril, that she was stepping into a world of shadows and deceit, where her every move would be scrutinized, her every word weighed. But she would not falter. She would face the beast, bargain with him, do whatever it took to save her father, even if it meant sacrificing her own future. The weight of Ashenmere, of her family's honor, rested squarely on her shoulders, and she would not let them fall. The wind howled outside, a mournful cry that echoed the turmoil in her heart. A storm was coming, and Isolde knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was walking straight into its eye. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Montrose. The journey to Blackwood Keep was a blur of bleak landscapes and even bleaker thoughts. Isolde, accompanied by two of Ashenmere's most trusted guards, rode through the chilling autumn air, the wind whipping her cloak around her like a shroud. The rolling hills of her homeland gave way to the stark, foreboding forests of Blackwood, the trees tall and ancient, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The very air seemed heavier here, laden with a sense of ancient power and unspoken secrets. Each creak of the saddle, each rustle of leaves in the wind, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She replayed the memory of the siege in her mind, the fear she had felt then, the strange, unsettling presence of Lord Montrose. He was a man shrouded in shadow, a warrior whose reputation preceded him like a thunderclap. She had heard tales of his ruthlessness in battle, his unwavering determination, his almost unnatural ability to anticipate his enemies' moves. She had tried to convince herself that it was mere youthful fear, the exaggerated tales of a frightened girl. But a nagging doubt persisted. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from other men, something that both terrified and intrigued her. They reached the gates of Blackwood Keep at dusk. The fortress was even more imposing than she remembered. Built of dark, volcanic rock, it seemed to grow out of the very earth itself, its towers reaching towards the sky like the claws of some monstrous beast. The banners of House Montrose, a black wolf rampant on a field of gray, snapped in the wind, a stark reminder of the power that resided within. The guards at the gate, clad in black armor that seemed to absorb the fading light, eyed them with suspicion. Isolde, despite her inner turmoil, held her head high, meeting their gaze with a steady composure that belied the fear churning in her stomach. "Lady Isolde of Ashenmere," she announced, her voice clear and strong, "requests an audience with Lord Montrose." The guards exchanged a glance, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even amusement, in their eyes. One of them disappeared into the keep, leaving Isolde and her companions to wait in the growing darkness. The silence was broken only by the wind whistling through the battlements and the distant howling of wolves, a sound that sent a shiver down Isolde's spine. After what seemed like an eternity, the guard returned. "Lord Montrose will see you," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Follow me." Isolde dismounted, her legs stiff from the long ride. She handed the reins of her horse to one of her guards, and followed the Blackwood soldier into the keep. The interior was as stark and imposing as the exterior. The walls were bare stone, the only light coming from flickering torches that cast long, dancing shadows. The air was cold and damp, smelling of stone and smoke, and something metallic, like the faint scent of blood. They passed through a series of corridors and chambers, each one more intimidating than the last. Isolde could feel the eyes of unseen guards upon her, their presence a constant reminder that she was in enemy territory, a lone lamb walking into the wolf's den. Finally, they reached a large, oak-paneled door, guarded by 2 more soldiers in black armor. The guard who had led them here nodded to his companions, and the door swung open, revealing a spacious, yet surprisingly austere chamber. A fire roared in a massive hearth at the far end of the room, casting a warm, flickering glow that contrasted sharply with the cold stone walls. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound tomes, a testament to a mind that valued knowledge as well as power. A large, wolfskin rug lay before the hearth, and standing beside it, his back to the door, was Lord Rhys Montrose. He was taller than she remembered, his broad shoulders filling out the dark, fur-trimmed tunic he wore. His hair, as black as the wolf on his banner, was pulled back from his face, revealing a strong jaw and high cheekbones. He turned as she entered, and Isolde felt her breath catch in her throat. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, met hers, and she felt a jolt of something akin to recognition, a flicker of the same unsettling intensity she had seen years ago. But there was something else there now, something that hadn't been there before. A weariness, perhaps, or a hint of sadness. He did not speak, merely studied her with an unnerving intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through her, to the fear and desperation she was trying so hard to conceal. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Isolde fought the urge to fidget, to look away. She had come here seeking his help, and she would not be cowed. She would meet his gaze, and she would make her plea. The shadow of Montrose loomed large, but she would not be consumed by it. She would stand her ground, for her father's sake, for Ashenmere's sake, for her own. The fate of her house, and perhaps her own, rested on this encounter. The weight of it pressed down on her, heavy as the stones of the keep itself. Chapter 3. A desperate plea. The silence in the chamber stretched, taut and heavy, like a drawn bowstring. Isolde could feel the weight of Montrose's gaze, scrutinizing, assessing, and she fought to maintain her composure. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth, oblivious to the tension that filled the room, the flames casting dancing shadows on his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the dark depths of his eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the floor. "Lady Isolde, it has been many years." It was not a question, but a statement of fact. A reminder of the time that had passed, of the roles they had played then besieger and besieged. She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his words. "Lord Montrose, I thank you for granting me an audience." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement, or perhaps cynicism, in his eyes. Courtesy is a rare commodity these days, especially between those who were once adversaries. Isolde took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had not come here to exchange pleasantries. "I have come to you on a matter of grave importance, Lord Montrose. A matter of life and death." He gestured towards a chair opposite the hearth, a silent invitation to sit. Isolde hesitated for a moment, then accepted, perching on the edge of the seat, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He remained standing, his presence dominating the room. "My father, Lord Alaric of Ashenmere, stands accused of treason against the king," she said, her voice clear and steady, despite the tremor in her heart. She refused to show weakness, to let him see the desperation that gnawed at her insides. Montrose's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Treason is a serious charge, Lady Isolde. The king's justice is swift." "He is innocent," Isolde insisted, her voice rising slightly. "The evidence is false. a forgery designed to frame him. He has enemies at court, powerful enemies who seek to destroy him, to destroy Ashenmere. He moved then, slowly circling her, like a predator assessing its prey. Isolde fought the urge to flinch, to shrink away from his scrutiny. She met his gaze, unflinching, her eyes pleading, demanding, challenging. "And you believe I can help you?" he asked, his voice soft, yet laced with a hint of steel. "You have influence at court, Lord Montrose," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You are known for your impartiality, for your sense of justice." She hesitated, then added, "And you once spared Ashenmere, at the plea of a young girl." He stopped circling, standing directly in front of her, his shadow falling over her like a dark cloud. "That was a long time ago, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice low and resonant. "I was a different man then, and you were a child." "I may have been a child," Isolde said, her voice gaining strength, "but I remember your face, Lord Montrose. I remember the look in your eyes. You were not a monster, despite what they called you. You showed mercy, and I am asking for that mercy again, not for myself, but for my father." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense, searching. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The fate of her father, of Ashenmere, hung in the balance, suspended on the whim of this enigmatic, powerful man. Finally, he spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. "What makes you think I would risk my own position, my own reputation, to help the daughter of a man accused of treason?" Isolde met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Because I believe you are a man of honor, Lord Montrose. Despite your reputation, despite the fear you inspire, I believe you have a sense of justice that transcends the petty squabbles of the court. And because I have nothing else to offer." The last words were barely a whisper, a confession of her utter helplessness. She had laid herself bare before him, revealing her desperation, her vulnerability. It was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice. But she had no other choice. She had exhausted all other avenues, and he was her last, her only hope. The silence returned, deeper now, more profound. The fire crackled, the only sound in the vast chamber. Isolde waited, her breath held captive in her chest, her fate hanging precariously in the balance. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of past grievances and present dangers. The plea had been made. Now, only the answer remained. Chapter 4. The Warlord's Price. Montrose remained silent for what felt like an eternity, his gaze fixed on Isolde, his expression unreadable. The firelight danced in his eyes, casting flickering shadows that obscured his thoughts, his intentions. Isolde could feel the weight of his scrutiny, the power that emanated from him, a tangible force that filled the room. She had laid her cards on the table, her plea a mixture of desperate hope and calculated risk. Now, all she could do was wait. Finally, he moved, turning away from her and walking towards the hearth. He stood there for a moment, staring into the flames, his back to her, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the firelight. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the crackling of the burning logs. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost a murmur, as if he were speaking to himself rather than to her. "Honor, justice," these are words that are often bandied about, Lady Isolde, but rarely understood. They are ideals, lofty aspirations, but in the real world, they are often inconvenient. He turned back to face her, his eyes dark and shadowed. The court is a viper's nest, a breeding ground for ambition and betrayal. Loyalty is a fleeting commodity, easily bought and sold. Your father, whatever his virtues, has made powerful enemies, and they will not hesitate to use any means necessary to destroy him. Isolde felt a chill run down her spine, a confirmation of her worst fears. She had known the dangers, but hearing them spoken aloud, by this man who clearly understood the intricacies of courtly intrigue, made them all the more real, all the more terrifying. "But you're different," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're not like them." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement, or perhaps cynicism, in his eyes. "Am I not?" You seem to place a great deal of faith in a man you barely know, a man who was once your enemy. I have to believe, Isolde said, her voice trembling slightly, that there is still some good in this world. That there are still men who value honor above ambition, justice above expediency. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense, searching. Then, a slow smile spread across his face, a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. It was a smile that sent a shiver of unease down Isolde's spine, a smile that hinted at something dangerous. You are a persuasive woman, Lady Isolde, he said, his voice soft, yet laced with a hint of steel. And perhaps there is a kernel of truth in your words. Perhaps I am not entirely devoid of sentimentality. He paused, then added, but sentimentality, like honor, has its price.
Isolde's heart sank.
She had known there would be a price, but hearing it stated so bluntly, so coldly, sent a wave of dread washing over her. She braced herself, preparing for the worst. What is your price, Lord Montrose? She asked, her voice steady, despite the turmoil within. He moved closer, his presence looming over her, his shadow falling across her like a dark shroud. I will help you, Lady Isolde, he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. I will use my influence, my resources, to clear your father's name. But in return he paused, his eyes locking with hers, holding her captive in their gaze. In return, you will become my wife. The words struck Isolde like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She stared at him, speechless, her mind reeling. Marriage? To him? To the beast of Blackwood? The very idea was unthinkable. And yet she looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, of mockery. But there was none. He was serious. Deadly serious. He was offering her a bargain. A devil's bargain, perhaps, but a bargain nonetheless. Her father's life, her family's honor, in exchange for herself. Her mind raced, weighing the options, the consequences. To refuse would be to condemn her father to certain death. To accept would be to bind herself to a man she barely knew, a man whose reputation was shrouded in darkness, a man who inspired both fear and a strange, unsettling fascination. She thought of her father, his strength, his unwavering loyalty. She thought of Ashenmere, the land she loved, the people who depended on her. She thought of her own future, the dreams she had once held, the hopes she had cherished. All of it, balanced on a knife's edge, teetering between salvation and despair. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze, to speak the words that would seal her fate. I accept, she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet firm with resolve. I will marry you, Lord Montrose, in exchange for my father's life. The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. The bargain had been struck. The price had been named. And Isolde knew, with a chilling certainty, that her life would never be the same. The die was cast, and she was now bound to the beast. Chapter 5. Oaths and Shackles. The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable, a binding contract forged in desperation and sealed with a whispered promise. Isolde felt a strange mix of relief and dread wash over her. Relief that she had found a way, however perilous, to save her father. Dread at the prospect of what lay ahead, of the life she had just bargained away. Montrose's expression did not change, but a flicker of something satisfaction, perhaps, or even a hint of respect passed through his eyes. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her acceptance. Then it is agreed, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. We will be married as soon as arrangements can be made. In the meantime, I will begin working to clear your father's name. Isolde felt a surge of hope, a fragile tendril reaching for the light. You will truly help him? I give you my word, Lady Isolde, he said, his voice firm. And a Montrose does not break his oaths lightly. She wanted to believe him, to trust in his promise. But a nagging doubt persisted. He was a man of power and ambition, a man used to getting what he wanted. What guarantee did she have that he would honor his side of the bargain once they were wed? How will you do it? she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The evidence against him is strong. Evidence can be manipulated, Lady Isolde, he said, a cynical smile playing on his lips. Witnesses can be persuaded. And the king, for all his power, is not immune to influence. He paused, then added, I have allies at court, people who owe me favors. I will use them to your advantage. But it will take time, and it will require discretion. Isolde nodded, understanding the need for secrecy. The court was a dangerous place, and any misstep could have dire consequences. She would have to trust him, to rely on his cunning and his connections, to navigate the treacherous waters of royal intrigue.
What will happen to me?
She asked, her voice barely a whisper. While you are working to clear his name, you will remain here, at Blackwood Keep, he said, his gaze sweeping over her. As my guest, and as my future wife. The words sent a shiver down Isolde's spine. To be confined within these walls, under his watchful eye, was a daunting prospect. She would be a prisoner, in a sense, albeit a gilded one. I understand, she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. She would not show weakness, not now. She had made her choice, and she would face the consequences with courage and determination. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching, probing. Then he spoke, his voice softer than before, almost gentle. This is not how I envisioned my marriage, Lady Isolde, he said. I had hoped for a different kind of union. One based on mutual respect, perhaps even affection. Isolde felt a pang of something akin to regret. She had robbed him of that, of the chance to choose his own bride, to build a life based on something more than a desperate bargain. I am sorry, Lord Montrose, she said, her voice sincere. I know that this is not what you wanted. He shrugged, a gesture that seemed to dismiss her apology. What is wanted is often irrelevant, Lady Isolde, he said. We must all make sacrifices, play the roles that fate assigns us. He paused, then added, but perhaps we can still find some common ground, some measure of understanding. We are bound together now, by oath and by circumstance. We must make the best of it. His words offered a glimmer of hope, a suggestion that their relationship might not be entirely devoid of warmth, of respect. It was a small comfort, but it was something. A seed of possibility planted in the barren ground of their forced union. He gestured towards a bell pull on the wall. I will have chambers prepared for you, he said. You must be weary from your journey. Rest, Lady Isolde. We have much to discuss, much to plan. Isolde nodded, grateful for the reprieve. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She needed time to process what had happened, to prepare herself for the challenges that lay ahead. He rang the bell, and a servant appeared, bowing low. Montrose gave instructions, his voice calm and authoritative. The servant departed, and Isolde was left alone with the man who was now her betrothed, her captor, her only hope. She looked at him, at the strong lines of his face, the dark intensity of his eyes. He was a mystery, an enigma, a man of contradictions. And she was bound to him, her fate intertwined with his, for better or for worse. The oaths had been spoken, the shackles forged. And Isolde knew that her life, her very soul, was now in the hands of the beast of Blackwood. The weight of that realization settled upon her, heavy and inescapable, as she prepared to enter her gilded cage. Chapter 6. The Whispers of Ashenmere. The chambers prepared for Isolde were surprisingly luxurious, a stark contrast to the austere grandeur of the rest of the keep. The walls were hung with rich tapestries depicting scenes of hunting and falconry, the floor covered with thick carpets woven in intricate patterns. A fire blazed merrily in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room, and a large, four-poster bed, draped with heavy velvet curtains, dominated the space. A young woman, a servant named Alara, was waiting for her, her eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. She helped Isolde out of her travel-worn clothes and into a soft, linen nightgown, her touch gentle and efficient. Lord Montrose has instructed me to attend to your every need, my lady, Alara said, her voice soft and deferential. If there is anything you require, anything at all, you have only to ask. Isolde managed a weak smile.
Thank you, Ilara.
You are very kind. Kindness was a welcome balm to her wounded spirit. She had expected coldness, perhaps even hostility, from the servants of Blackwood Keep. But Ilara seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being, a small comfort in this strange and unsettling place. After Ilara had left, Isolde sank onto the edge of the bed, her body aching with exhaustion, her mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. She had made a bargain, a desperate pact, but the full weight of her decision was only now beginning to sink in. She was to marry a man she barely knew, a man whose reputation was as dark and foreboding as the keep that now held her captive. She looked around the room, at the rich furnishings, the opulent decorations. It was a far cry from her chambers at Ashenmere, which were smaller, simpler, but filled with familiar objects, with memories of her childhood, of her family. Here, she was surrounded by luxury, but it was a cold, impersonal luxury, a constant reminder of her status as a prisoner, a pawn in a game she did not fully understand. She rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the darkened landscape. The moon was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, casting the world in an eerie half-light. She could see the outline of the forest, the trees swaying in the wind, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out to her. She thought of her father, imprisoned in the king's dungeons, his fate uncertain. She clung to the hope that Montrose would keep his word, that he would use his influence to secure his release. But a nagging doubt persisted. Could she truly trust him? Could she rely on the honor of a man known as the Beast? A knock on the door startled her. Ilara entered, carrying a tray laden with food and drink. "Lord Montrose thought you might be hungry, my lady," she said, setting the tray on a small table near the fire. Isolde's stomach rumbled, a reminder that she had barely eaten all day. She sat down at the table and began to eat, the food surprisingly delicious, a welcome distraction from her worries. As she ate, Ilara hovered nearby, her eyes filled with unspoken questions. Finally, she could contain her curiosity no longer. "Forgive me, my lady," she said, her voice hesitant, "but is it true? Are you truly to marry Lord Montrose?" Isolde paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. The news had spread quickly, it seemed. She nodded slowly.
It is true, Ilara.
Ilara's eyes widened.
But why?
He is not like other men. Isolde sighed. It was a question she had been asking herself repeatedly.
It is a long story, Ilara, she said.
A matter of family honor. Ilara seemed to understand, or at least to accept her explanation. She nodded slowly, her gaze filled with sympathy. "He is not a cruel man, my lady," she said, her voice soft. "He is stern, yes, and demanding, but he is also just. He cares for his people, for his lands. He is respected." Isolde listened, her heart strangely comforted by Ilara's words. It was reassuring to hear that Montrose was not entirely the monster he was made out to be. Perhaps there was hope, after all, that their marriage might not be a complete disaster. "Thank you, Ilara," she said, offering a small smile. "Your words are comforting." Ilara returned the smile, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "I will leave you to your rest, my lady," she said. "But if you need anything at all, please do not hesitate to call for me." After Ilara had left, Isolde finished her meal, feeling slightly more at peace. She climbed into the bed, the soft linen sheets a welcome comfort against her skin. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the worries, the fears that plagued her mind. But sleep did not come easily. Images of her father, of Montrose, of the uncertain future that lay ahead, danced behind her eyelids. Whispers of Ashenmere, of her family's disgrace, of her own impending marriage to the Beast, echoed in her ears. She tossed and turned, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Hope and despair, fear and determination, fought for dominance within her. The gilded cage was comfortable, but it was still a cage. And Isolde knew that the true test of her strength, of her courage, was yet to come. The whispers followed her into the uneasy realm of dreams, a constant reminder of the bargain she had made and the uncertain future she now faced. Chapter 7. Scars of the Past. The next morning, Isolde awoke to the sound of birdsong, a surprisingly cheerful sound in this otherwise somber place. Sunlight streamed through a gap in the heavy curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She lay in bed for a moment, gathering her thoughts, steeling herself for the day ahead. Alara arrived soon after, bringing with her a simple but elegant gown of dark green wool, a color that suited Isolde's complexion and complemented her auburn hair. She helped Isolde dress, her touch deft and efficient, her demeanor quiet and respectful. "Lord Montrose requests your presence in the library, my lady," Alara said, as she fastened the last of the clasps on Isolde's gown. "He wishes to discuss matters pertaining to your arrangement." Isolde nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. She had barely spoken to Montrose since their agreement, and she was unsure what to expect from him. She followed Alara through the winding corridors of the keep, her footsteps echoing on the stone floors. The library, when they reached it, was even more impressive than she had remembered. The shelves were filled with books, their leather spines gleaming in the morning light. A large window overlooked the courtyard, offering a view of the bustling activity below. Montrose was standing by the window, his back to the door, his hands clasped behind him. He was dressed in a dark tunic and breeches, his attire simple, yet elegant, emphasizing his broad shoulders and lean frame. He turned as she entered, his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, meeting hers. "Lady Isolde," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I trust you slept well." "As well as could be expected, Lord Montrose," she replied, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her heart. He gestured towards a pair of chairs near the hearth, where a fire crackled merrily. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." Isolde sat down, her back straight, her hands clasped in her lap. He took the chair opposite her, his gaze intense, scrutinizing. "I have already set in motion the plans to clear your father's name," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "My agents are at work, gathering information, influencing witnesses. It will take time, but I am confident that we will succeed." Isolde felt a surge of relief, a lightening of the burden she had been carrying. "Thank you, Lord Montrose," she said, her voice sincere. "I am grateful." He nodded, acknowledging her gratitude. "But as I said before, this will require discretion. You must be careful what you say, to whom you speak. The court is a dangerous place, and any misstep could jeopardize our efforts." "I understand," Isolde said. "I will be cautious." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing. Then he spoke, his voice softer than before, almost gentle. "I know this is not easy for you, Lady Isolde," he said. "To be forced into a marriage you did not choose, to be bound to a man you barely know." Isolde met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "It is not what I wanted, Lord Montrose," she said. "But I made my choice, and I will abide by it." A flicker of something respect, perhaps, or even admiration passed through his eyes. He nodded slowly. "You are a strong woman, Lady Isolde," he said. "Stronger than you know." He paused, then added, "I will not pretend that this will be an easy marriage. We are both scarred by the past. We have both known loss, betrayal. But perhaps we can find some common ground, some measure of peace, together." He reached out, as to take her hand, but stopped midair. He withdrew his hand, his jaw clenching slightly. "I was betrothed once," he said, looking away, towards the fire. "To a woman I loved deeply. She was killed. During the war." His voice was rough with repressed emotion. Isolde felt a jolt. Not of surprise, she realized, but understanding. "I am sorry," my lord, Isolde offered, genuinely moved. He glanced back, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own past losses. The scars of his past, she realized, were as deep, as raw, as her own. And in that moment, she saw him not as the beast, not as her captor, but as a man, a fellow traveler on the difficult road of life, burdened by sorrows, haunted by memories. It was a fleeting connection, a fragile bridge across the chasm that separated them. But it was there, a spark of shared humanity in the darkness of their forced union. The realization shifted something within her, a subtle softening of the fear, a glimmer of hope for something more. Chapter 8. A Glimmer of Steel. The days that followed settled into a strange, uneasy routine. Isolde spent much of her time exploring the keep, familiarizing herself with its labyrinthine corridors, its hidden chambers, its imposing battlements. She was given a surprising amount of freedom, allowed to wander at will, though always under the watchful eyes of the guards, who treated her with a mixture of respect and caution. She discovered a small, walled garden, tucked away behind the stables, a hidden oasis of peace and tranquility amidst the stark austerity of the keep. It was filled with fragrant herbs and late-blooming flowers, a testament to someone's care and attention. She spent hours there, reading, thinking, trying to make sense of her new life, of the uncertain future that lay ahead. She saw Montrose infrequently, usually at meals, which they took together in a small, private dining chamber. He was polite, courteous, even considerate, but there was always a distance between them, a reserve that she could not quite penetrate. He spoke of his efforts to clear her father's name, of the progress he was making, but he revealed little of his own thoughts, his own feelings. One evening, as they were finishing their meal, he surprised her by asking, "Do you ride, Lady Isolde?" She looked up, startled by the unexpected question. "Yes, my lord," she replied. "I am quite proficient." He nodded, a flicker of something akin to approval in his eyes. "Good. Then perhaps tomorrow we shall ride together."
It is time you saw something of Blackwood lands.
Isolde hesitated. The prospect of spending time alone with him, outside the confines of the keep, was both intriguing and unsettling. But she could not refuse. It was an opportunity to learn more about him, to perhaps bridge the gap that separated them. "I would like that, my lord," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her heart. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the autumn air crisp and invigorating. Isolde dressed in a riding habit of dark blue velvet, her hair braided and pinned beneath a matching cap. She found Montrose waiting for her in the courtyard, already mounted on a magnificent black stallion, his presence commanding, his demeanor watchful. He helped her onto a beautiful gray mare, his touch brief and impersonal, yet sending a shiver down her spine. They rode out of the keep, accompanied by 2 guards, who kept a discreet distance behind them. As they rode, Montrose pointed out various landmarks, explaining the history of his lands, the challenges he faced in managing them. He spoke of the ongoing conflicts with neighboring lords, of the constant threat of raids and skirmishes. He spoke of his people, of his responsibility to protect them, to provide for them. Isolde listened, fascinated by his words, by the glimpse they offered into his world, into his mind. He was not just a warlord, a conqueror, she realized. He was also a steward, a protector, a man burdened by responsibility, by the weight of his position. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic beat of the horses' hooves and the wind whistling through the trees. Then, Montrose spoke again, his voice softer than before, almost reflective. "This land, it is in my blood," he said. "My ancestors fought and died for it. I will do the same, if necessary." Isolde looked at him, at the strong lines of his face, the intensity of his gaze. She saw a passion there, a dedication, that she could not help but admire. "I understand," she said, her voice sincere. "Ashimere is the same for me." He glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You surprise me, Lady Isolde," he said. "I had expected resentment, bitterness." "I will not lie, my lord," she said. "I am not happy about our arrangement, but I understand the need for it, and I will not let my personal feelings interfere with what must be done." He nodded slowly, a hint of respect in his gaze. "You are a woman of steel, Lady Isolde," he said. "A rare quality. A glimmer of steel," she thought. Perhaps that was what he saw in her, what had drawn him to her, beyond the desperate bargain they had struck. Perhaps it was that same quality, that strength, that would allow her to survive, to thrive, in this new and challenging life. They rode on, the silence between them no longer strained, but almost comfortable. A shared understanding, a mutual respect, was beginning to form, a fragile bond forged in the crucible of their circumstances. The glimmer was small, but it was there, a hint of something more, something that might, one day, blossom into something stronger. She glimpsed, not a monster, but a protector of his realm, and sensed a kindred spirit in their devotion to their lands. Chapter 9. The Lioness in the Wolf's Den. As the days turned into weeks, Isolde began to find her place within the walls of Blackwood Keep. She was no longer a stranger, an outsider, but a presence, a force to be reckoned with, albeit a subtle one. She interacted with the servants, the guards, the household staff, treating them with respect and courtesy, earning their loyalty and their admiration. She learned their names, their stories, their concerns. She listened to their complaints, their grievances, offering what help she could, using her influence with Montrose to address their needs, to improve their lives. She became, in a sense, a mediator, a bridge between the lord of the keep and his people. She also began to take an interest in the running of the household, offering suggestions, making improvements, streamlining operations. She had a keen eye for detail, a natural talent for organization, and she put those skills to good use, much to the surprise and the grudging respect of the steward, a gruff, old man named Osric, who had initially been wary of her interference. Montrose, to his credit, did not object to her involvement. In fact, he seemed to appreciate it, even encourage it. He recognized her intelligence, her competence, her inherent ability to lead. He began to consult her on matters of importance, seeking her advice, valuing her opinion. One evening, as they were discussing a dispute between two neighboring villages over grazing rights, he surprised her by saying, "You have a gift for this, Lady Isolde. A natural talent for diplomacy, for finding solutions that benefit all parties." Isolde felt a flush of pride at his words. It was the first time he had openly praised her, acknowledged her abilities. "I try to be fair, my lord," she said, her voice modest. "To see both sides of an issue." He nodded, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Fairness is a rare commodity, Lady Isolde, especially in these turbulent times. But it is a valuable one. It earns respect, loyalty. It builds trust."
Trust.
It was a word that hung heavy in the air between them. They were bound together by a forced marriage, by a desperate bargain. But trust was something that had to be earned, something that could not be demanded. Isolde knew that she was still, in many ways, a prisoner in Blackwood Keep. Her movements were restricted, her future uncertain. But she was also beginning to realize that she had a certain amount of power, a certain amount of influence, within these walls. She was the future Lady of Blackwood, the betrothed of the powerful Lord Montrose. And she would use that position, that power, to the best of her ability. She would not be a passive victim, a pawn in someone else's game. She would be an active participant, a force to be reckoned with. She would be a lioness in the wolf's den, protecting her interests, defending her people, making her mark on this new and challenging world. She had begun to notice the subtle ways in which Montrose watched her, the way his gaze lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. There was a curiosity there, a fascination, that she could not quite decipher. It was unsettling, yes, but also intriguing. She, in turn, found herself observing him, studying him, trying to understand the man behind the mask, the warrior behind the reputation. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the lines of stress etched on his face. She saw the burden he carried, the responsibility he bore. She began to see him not just as the beast, not just as her captor, but as a man, a complex, flawed, but ultimately honorable man. A man who, despite his own scars, despite his own demons, was trying to do what was right, to protect his people, to uphold his honor. The lioness was still wary of the wolf, still cautious, still aware of the dangers. But she was also beginning to see him in a new light, to appreciate his strengths, his qualities. A grudging respect, a tentative understanding, was growing between them, a fragile bond forged in the crucible of their shared circumstances. The den was still a dangerous place, but Isolde was no longer afraid. She was finding her footing, her strength, her voice. And she would not be silenced. She would roar. Chapter 10. Secrets in the Stone. One afternoon, while exploring the older, less used sections of the keep, Isolde stumbled upon a small, hidden chamber tucked away behind a tapestry depicting a scene from a long-forgotten battle. The door was unlocked, and she pushed it open, curious to see what lay within. The chamber was small and circular, with a single, narrow window that offered a view of the surrounding forest. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with old scrolls, dusty tomes, and strange artifacts. It was clearly a study, a private sanctuary, but it had been unused for a long time. A thick layer of dust covered everything, and the air was stale and musty. Isolde felt a thrill of excitement, a sense of discovery. She had always loved books, loved learning, and this hidden chamber seemed like a treasure trove of forgotten knowledge. She began to explore, carefully examining the scrolls and tomes, her fingers tracing the faded writing, the intricate illustrations. She found ancient maps, chronicles of long-dead kings, treatises on warfare and philosophy, and a collection of letters, bound together with a faded ribbon. The letters were written in a delicate, feminine hand, and they were addressed to Rhys Montrose. Isolde hesitated, her conscience pricked by a sense of intrusion. These were clearly private letters, personal correspondence, not meant for her eyes. But her curiosity, her desire to learn more about the man she was to marry, overcame her scruples. She carefully untied the ribbon and began to read. The letters were from a woman named Lyra, and they were filled with love, with longing, with a deep and abiding affection for Rhys. They spoke of their shared dreams, their hopes for the future, their betrothal. Isolde's heart ached as she read, her own circumstances a stark contrast to the passionate, joyful love expressed in these letters. She learned of Lyra's beauty, her kindness, her intelligence. She learned of Rhys's devotion to her, his unwavering love, his vulnerability. It was a side of him she had never seen, a side that had been hidden beneath layers of stoicism and reserve. The last letter was dated shortly before the war in which Lyra had been killed. It was filled with fear, with foreboding, with a desperate plea for Rhys to stay safe, to return to her. Isolde's eyes filled with tears as she read, her heart breaking for the young woman who had lost everything, for the man who had been left behind, shattered by grief. She carefully retied the ribbon, placing the letters back on the shelf, her heart heavy with sadness, with a newfound understanding of Montrose's pain, his reserve, his reluctance to love again. She had known he had been betrothed before, that his beloved had died, but seeing it in writing, reading the words of the woman he had lost, made it all the more real, all the more poignant. She left the chamber, closing the door behind her, her mind filled with images of Lyra, of Rhys, of the love they had shared, the tragedy they had endured. She felt a pang of guilt for having intruded on their private world, for having unearthed their secrets. She did not tell Montrose about her discovery. It was not her place to reveal what she had found, to expose his wounds, his vulnerabilities. But the knowledge she had gained changed her perception of him, deepened her understanding of his character. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, she looked at him with new eyes, seeing the sadness that lingered beneath the surface, the pain that he kept hidden from the world. She wanted to reach out to him, to offer comfort, to acknowledge his loss, but she did not know how. He seemed to sense her gaze, her unspoken thoughts. He looked at her, his eyes questioning, searching. "Is there something troubling you, Lady Isolde?" he asked, his voice concerned. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, my lord," she said. "I am fine." It was a lie, of course, but it was a necessary lie. She could not reveal what she had learned, not yet. Perhaps, in time, he would open up to her, share his pain, his grief. But until then, she would keep his secret, protect his vulnerability, as she hoped he would protect hers. The secrets in the stone were safe with her, a silent testament to a love lost, a life shattered, a bond forged in the crucible of shared sorrow. The weight of it settled upon her, a heavy burden, but also a connection, a deeper understanding of the man she was to marry. His past was now intertwined with her present, and their future, whatever it might hold, would be shaped by the echoes of what had been. Chapter 11. The Tournament of Truths. Word arrived from the royal court, carried by a grim-faced messenger bearing the king's seal. The trial of Lord Alaric of Ashenmere had been concluded. He had been found not guilty. The forged letter had been exposed, the true conspirators revealed, thanks to the efforts of Montrose's agents, who had worked tirelessly, discreetly, to uncover the truth. Isolde felt a wave of relief wash over her, so intense that she almost collapsed. Her father was safe. He was free. Her bargain with Montrose had been fulfilled. She had paid the price, and he had delivered on his promise. She sought him out immediately, finding him in the training yard, practicing swordplay with one of his knights. He was a formidable figure, his movements swift and powerful, his skill undeniable. He dispatched his opponent quickly, then turned to face her, his chest heaving, his eyes gleaming with exertion. "My lord," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "The messenger, my father," he nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "He is free, Lady Isolde. You have my word." Tears welled up at her eyes, tears of relief, of gratitude, of something else she could not quite name. She ran to him, impulsively throwing her arms around him, embracing him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you, Rhys." It was the first time she had used his given name, the first time she had shown him such open affection. He stood stiffly for a moment, surprised by her embrace, then slowly, tentatively, he returned it, his arms encircling her, holding her close. It was a brief embrace, a fleeting moment of connection, but it was significant. It was a breaking down of barriers, a crossing of boundaries. It was a recognition of their shared humanity, of their mutual dependence, of the bond that had been forged between them, however reluctantly. He released her gently, his hands lingering on her arms for a moment longer than necessary. His eyes met hers, searching, questioning. "You are welcome, Isolde," he said, his voice husky. The king, in his infinite wisdom, had decided to hold a tournament, to make public his renewed trust on Lord Alaric, and to celebrate the discovery of the true traitors. All major houses were ordered to participate, including, naturally, House Montrose. "A tournament," Montrose said later, a cynical smile playing on his lips. "A display of royal favor, a charade of justice. But it is also an opportunity to demonstrate our strength, our loyalty, our unity." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "You will attend, of course, Lady Isolde, as my betrothed. You will be at my side, representing House Montrose." Isolde nodded, understanding the significance of his words. It was a public declaration of their alliance, a display of their combined power. It was also a test, a challenge. She would be scrutinized, judged, by the entire court. She would have to prove herself worthy of her position, of her new role. The tournament was a grand affair, a spectacle of color and pageantry. Knights from across the realm gathered to compete, their armor gleaming in the sunlight, their banners snapping in the wind. The stands were filled with nobles, their ladies, and commoners, all eager to witness the displays of skill and courage. Isolde, dressed in a gown of deep crimson velvet, embroidered with the black wolf of House Montrose, sat beside Rhys in the royal box, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She felt the eyes of the court upon her, assessing, judging, whispering. Rhys, for his part, seemed unfazed by the scrutiny. He was in his element, a warrior among warriors, a lord among lords. He greeted his rivals with a mixture of courtesy and challenge, his demeanor confident, his presence commanding. The tournament began with a series of jousts, knights charging at each other with lances leveled, the clash of their weapons echoing across the field. Rhys did not participate in the jousting, but he watched intently, his eyes following the action, his mind clearly analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of each competitor. He did, however, enter the melee, a chaotic, free for all battle involving dozens of knights fighting on foot with swords, axes, and maces. Isolde watched with bated breath, her heart in her throat, as he plunged into the fray, his black armor a stark contrast to the colorful livery of his opponents. He fought with a ferocity, a skill, that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He moved with the grace of a panther, the power of a lion, his sword a blur of steel, deflecting blows, striking down opponents. Isolde saw, for the first time, the full extent of his warrior prowess, the reason he was known as the Beast.
But she also saw something else.
She saw the control, the discipline, the strategy. He was not just fighting blindly, ragingly. He was thinking, planning, anticipating. He was a leader, directing his men, protecting his allies, exploiting his enemies' weaknesses. He emerged victorious, of course, his armor battered, his body bruised, but his spirit unbroken. He stood in the center of the field, his sword raised in triumph, the cheers of the crowd washing over him. Isolde felt a surge of pride, of admiration. She had known he was a warrior, a powerful lord, but seeing him in action, witnessing his skill, his courage, his leadership, gave her a new appreciation for his abilities, his character. The tournament was more than just a spectacle, she realized. It was a revelation, an unveiling of truths, both about Rhys and about herself. She was no longer just a pawn in his game, a bargaining chip. She was his partner, his ally, his equal, and she would stand by his side, proudly, confidently, facing whatever challenges lay ahead. The lioness had found her place beside the wolf, and together, they would rule their den. Chapter 12. Echoes of Betrayal. The tournament had been a triumph, a public display of Montrose's power and Isolde's position as his future bride. But beneath the surface of celebration and spectacle, currents of intrigue and suspicion still flowed. The court was a viper's nest, and even a victory as decisive as Montrose's could not silence all whispers, all doubts. Isolde, despite her newfound confidence, was still aware of the precariousness of her situation. She was an outsider, a woman who had risen to prominence through a forced marriage, a woman whose past was shadowed by the accusation of treason against her father. She knew that there were those who resented her, who doubted her, who would seek to undermine her position. One evening, as she was walking in the gardens of the royal palace, she was approached by Lady Alara of House Kendrick, a woman known for her beauty, her sharp wit, and her ambition. Alara was a distant cousin of the king, and she had been rumored to be a potential bride for Montrose before Isolde's arrival on the scene. Lady Isolde, Alara said, her voice sweet, yet laced with a hint of malice. You look radiant. Marriage to Lord Montrose seems to agree with you. Isolde met her gaze, unflinching. Thank you, Lady Alara, she said, her voice cool and polite. I am content. Alara smiled, a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Content? Such a modest word. I would have thought you would be overjoyed. To have captured the heart of the formidable Lord Montrose is no small feat. Isolde felt a prickle of irritation, but she kept her composure. I am grateful for the opportunity to serve House Montrose, she said, choosing her words carefully. Serve? Alara raised an eyebrow, her expression mocking. Is that how you see your role? As a servant? I had thought you were to be his wife, his equal. A wife's duty is to support her husband, Isolde said, her voice steady. To stand by his side, to share his burdens, and to bear his heirs, Alara added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. A crucial duty, wouldn't you agree? Especially for a house as ambitious as Montrose. Isolde felt her cheeks flush with anger, but she refused to be baited. I am aware of my responsibilities, Lady Alara, she said, her voice tight. Alara moved closer, her perfume, a heavy, cloying scent, filling Isolde's nostrils. I have heard whispers, Lady Isolde, she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. Whispers about your father's miraculous acquittal. Whispers about Lord Montrose's convenient intervention. Isolde's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that there were rumors, suspicions, but to hear them spoken aloud, so brazenly, was unsettling. My father was innocent, she said, her voice firm. The evidence against him was false. Of course, Alara said, her voice dripping with disbelief. And Lord Montrose, being the honorable man that he is, simply uncovered the truth. How fortunate for you. She paused, then added, but some might say too fortunate. Some might say that Lord Montrose orchestrated the entire affair. That he used your father's predicament to secure your hand in marriage. Isolde felt a chill run down her spine. It was a thought that had crossed her own mind, a nagging doubt that she had tried to suppress. But to hear it spoken aloud, by this woman who clearly despised her, was disturbing. That is a lie, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Lord Montrose would never, wouldn't he? Alara interrupted, her eyes gleaming with malice. He is a man of ambition, Lady Isolde. A man who will stop at nothing to achieve his goals. And you were simply a means to an end. A pawn in his game. She leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper. Be careful, Lady Isolde. You may think you have tamed the beast, but he is still a wild creature. And he will not hesitate to betray you if it serves his purpose. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Isolde standing alone in the garden, her mind reeling, her heart filled with doubt and fear. The echoes of betrayal, of past grievances, of present suspicions, swirled around her, threatening to engulf her. She had thought she had found her place, her strength, but Alara's words had shaken her, had reopened old wounds, had planted new seeds of distrust. She looked out at the manicured beauty, but felt nothing of the calm it was supposed to bring. The viper had struck, and its venom was spreading, poisoning her thoughts, her confidence, her fragile hope for a future with Rhys. She had faced enemies on the battlefield, but this was a different kind of warfare, a battle fought with whispers and innuendo, a battle that could destroy her from within. Chapter 13. The Falcon's Flight. Isolde returned to her chambers, her mind in turmoil. Alara's words, like poisoned arrows, had pierced her armor, leaving her vulnerable and shaken. She paced the room, her thoughts racing, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, fear, and betrayal. Could it be true? Could Montrose have orchestrated her father's predicament, used it as leverage to force her into marriage? It seemed unthinkable, and yet she knew he was a man of ambition, a man capable of ruthlessness. He had admitted as much himself. She thought back to their first meeting, to his cold, calculating gaze, to his blunt assessment of her situation. He had offered her a bargain, a devil's bargain, and she had accepted. But had she been naive? Had she been blinded by her desperation, by her desire to save her father? She stopped pacing, her gaze falling on a small, wooden falcon perched on a stand near the window. It was a gift from Montrose, a token of his esteem, he had said. He had told her that it represented freedom, strength, the ability to soar above adversity. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the smooth, carved feathers. It was a beautiful object, a symbol of hope, of resilience. But now, it seemed like a mockery, a reminder of her own captivity, of her dependence on a man she could not fully trust. She wanted to hurl it against the wall, to shatter it into 1,000 pieces. But she resisted the urge. Violence would solve nothing. It would only confirm Alara's accusations, validate her suspicions. Instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down, to think rationally. She needed to find out the truth, to uncover the reality behind the whispers, the innuendo. She could not rely on rumors, on speculation. She needed proof. She decided to speak to her father. He was back at Ashenmere, recovering from his ordeal. He would know the truth, or at least he would have a different perspective on the events that had transpired. She sent a message, requesting an urgent meeting. He replied immediately, agreeing to see her as soon as possible. The journey to Ashenmere was a blur of anxious anticipation. Isolde rode hard, pushing her horse to its limits, her mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. She was greeted with open arms by both her father and young brother. "Father," she said, after embracing him tightly, "I need to ask you something. Something important." He led her to his study, a familiar room filled with books and maps, a room where they had spent many hours together, discussing matters of state, of family, of life. "What is it, Isolde?" he asked, his voice concerned. "You look troubled." She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "The accusations against you," she said, her voice steady. "The forged letter, were you truly innocent? Or was there something more?" Her father looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and sadness. "Isolde," he said, "what are you saying? Of course, I was innocent. I would never betray the king." "But the evidence," Isolde said. "It was so convincing. How could it have been fabricated so easily?" Her father sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "The court is a treacherous place, Isolde," he said. "Enemies abound, and they are not afraid to use any means necessary to achieve their goals." "But Montrose," Isolde said. He intervened. "He cleared your name. Was it truly his doing? Or was he involved somehow?" Her father hesitated, his gaze avoiding hers. "Montrose, he is a powerful man, Isolde," he said. "He has many connections, many resources. He was able to persuade certain people to come forward, to reveal the truth." "But how?" Isolde persisted. "How did he know who to persuade? How did he know the evidence was false?" Her father looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, unsettling sorrow. "Isolde," he said, his voice barely a whisper, I do not know all the details. Montrose was discreet. He did not reveal his methods. He paused, then added, but I owe him my life, Isolde. He saved me, and for that, I am eternally grateful." Isolde felt a chill run down her spine. Her father's words, his evasiveness, his gratitude, confirmed her worst fears. Montrose had been involved, somehow. He had manipulated the situation, used it to his advantage. She had been a pawn, just as Alara had said. A pawn in a game of power, of ambition, of betrayal. She felt a surge of anger, of resentment, but also a strange sense of understanding. Montrose had done what he had to do, to secure his goals, to protect his interests. He had used her, yes, but he had also saved her father. He had kept his word, fulfilled his bargain. She was a falcon, yes, but she was also a captive. Her wings were clipped, her flight restricted. But she was still alive, still strong, still capable of soaring, if only she could find a way to break free from the cage that held her. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also liberating. She knew now what she was dealing with, who she was dealing with. And she would not be deceived again. The falcon would fly, one way or another. She would find her freedom, her independence, even within the confines of her gilded cage. Chapter 14. Beneath a Blood Moon. Isolde returned to Blackwood Keep, her heart heavy with the knowledge she had gained. She had confronted her father, and while he hadn't explicitly confirmed Montrose's manipulation, his evasiveness and gratitude had spoken volumes. She was a pawn, a piece in a larger game, but she was also a queen on the chessboard, and she would not be sacrificed easily. She avoided Montrose for the first few days, unable to face him, unable to reconcile the image of the honorable warrior with the cunning manipulator he had revealed himself to be. She spent her time in the gardens, in the library, anywhere but in his presence. But she knew she could not avoid him forever. They were bound together, by oath, by circumstance, by the impending marriage that loomed over them like a dark cloud. She needed to confront him, to demand answers, to understand. One evening, as she was sitting in the library, reading, or rather pretending to read, he found her. He entered the room silently, his presence filling the space, his gaze intense, searching. "Isolde," he said, his voice low and resonant. "You have been avoiding me." It was not a question, but a statement of fact. She closed the book, her heart pounding in her chest. "I have been preoccupied," she said, her voice evasive. He moved closer, his shadow falling over her. "Preoccupied with what?" he asked, his voice gentle, yet probing. She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. She saw the strength in his face, the lines of weariness etched around his eyes, the vulnerability that he kept hidden from the world. "With the truth," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her heart. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. The truth? About what? About my father, she said. About his acquittal. About your involvement. He did not flinch, did not look away. He met her gaze, unflinching. What about it? He asked, his voice calm, controlled. Did you orchestrate it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Did you use my father's predicament to force me into marriage? The silence stretched, taut and heavy, like a drawn bowstring. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound in the vast chamber. Isolde held her breath, waiting for his answer, her fate hanging precariously in the balance. Finally, he spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. I did what was necessary, Isolde, he said, to save your father's life, to secure your alliance. It was not a denial, but an admission, a confirmation of her worst fears. So you admit it, she said, her voice trembling with anger, with resentment. You used me. You manipulated me. I offered you a bargain, he said, his voice firm. You accepted. I had no choice. She cried, her voice rising. My father's life was at stake. And I saved it, he said, his voice unwavering. Would you have preferred that I let him die? That I stood by and did nothing? Isolde felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Anger, yes, but also a grudging respect. He had saved her father. He had kept his word. But at what cost? You could have found another way, she said, her voice weaker now. You could have helped him without forcing me to marry you. He shook his head slowly. There was no other way, Isolde, he said. Not one that would have guaranteed his safety, your cooperation. He paused, then added, I did what I believed was best. For both of us. Best for you, you mean, she said, her voice bitter. He stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers. No, Isolde, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. For both of us. I know this is not the marriage you wanted. But it is the marriage we have. And I will do everything in my power to make it work. He reached out, tentatively touching her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. It was a gentle touch, a tender gesture, that sent a shiver down her spine. I am not a monster, Isolde, he said, his voice husky. Despite what you may think, despite what others may say. I am a man, with flaws, with weaknesses, but also with a capacity for affection. He paused, then added, I may have forced your hand, but I will not force your heart. I will earn your trust, your respect, your love, if I can. It was a promise, a vow, spoken beneath the pale light of a rising moon, a moon that was tinged with red, a blood moon, an omen of what?
Danger?
Passion? Transformation? Isolde did not know. But she knew that she was no longer the same woman she had been when she first arrived at Blackwood Keep. She had been a pawn, yes, but she had also become a queen. And she would not be played again. She would play her own game, on her own terms. The bargain had been struck, the price paid, but the future was still unwritten. And Isolde, the lioness, would fight for her place beside the wolf, not as a captive, but as an equal, as a partner, as a lover, perhaps. The blood moon hung heavy in the sky, a silent witness to the shifting tides of their destiny. Chapter 15. The Price of Honor. The weeks following their confrontation were marked by a subtle shift in their relationship. Montrose, true to his word, made a conscious effort to earn Isolde's trust, to bridge the gap that his deception had created. He was more attentive, more considerate, more open. He shared his thoughts, his concerns, his plans with her, treating her not as a pawn, but as a partner and equal. He took her riding through his lands, showing her the beauty of Blackwood, the loyalty of his people. He spent hours with her in the library, discussing books, history, philosophy. He even began to teach her swordplay, recognizing her strength, her agility, her inherent warrior spirit. Isolde, for her part, responded cautiously, tentatively. She was still wary, still hurt by his betrayal, but she could not deny the changes in him, the genuine effort he was making. She began to see him in a new light, not just as the cunning manipulator, but as the man he truly was, complex, flawed, but also honorable in his own way. She found herself drawn to him, despite her reservations. She admired his strength, his intelligence, his dedication to his people. She appreciated his humor, his surprisingly gentle touch, his growing affection for her. One evening, as they were practicing swordplay in the training yard, he disarmed her easily, his blade pressing against her throat. He held her there for a moment, his eyes locked with hers, his breath warm on her skin. "You are improving, Isolde," he said, his voice husky. "But you are still too predictable." She felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, not from exertion, but from his proximity, from the intensity of his gaze. "Perhaps," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I am learning." He lowered his sword, his hand lingering on her arm for a moment longer than necessary. "I have no doubt you are," he said, his voice softer now. He stepped back, giving her space, but the connection between them remained, a palpable tension that filled the air. Later that night, as they were sitting by the fire in their private chambers, he spoke of his past, of his betrothal to Lyra, of the pain he had endured when she died. It was the first time he had spoken of her so openly, so vulnerably. "I loved her, Isolde," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "With all my heart. And when she died, a part of me died with her." Isolde felt a pang of sympathy for him, a deep understanding of his loss. She had lost her own mother, had known the pain of grief, the emptiness that it left behind. "I am sorry, Rhys," she said, her voice sincere. "I know what it is like to lose someone you love." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored her own. "Thank you, Isolde," he said. "Your words, they mean a great deal to me." He paused, then added, "I know I can never replace Lyra, but I am beginning to believe that I can love again, that I can find happiness with you." It was a confession, a declaration, that took Isolde by surprise. She had expected him to earn her trust, her respect, but she had not expected him to love her. "Rhys," she said, her voice hesitant, I do not know what to say." He smiled, a gentle, tender smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. "You do not have to say anything, Isolde," he said. "Just give me a chance. Give us a chance." She nodded slowly, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She was still wary, still cautious, but she could not deny the growing feelings she had for him. He had hurt her, yes, but he had also shown her kindness, respect, affection. He was a complex man, a man of contradictions, but he was also a man she could love. But their newfound, fragile peace was soon shattered. News arrived from the border of a rebellion brewing, led by a charismatic warlord who claimed to be the rightful heir to the throne. The king, weakened by internal conflicts and courtly intrigues, was ill-prepared to face this new threat. He summoned his lords, demanding their support, their armies. Montrose, ever loyal to the crown, despite his own reservations about the king's competence, answered the call. He prepared to ride to war, to defend the realm, to uphold his oath. Isolde, watching him prepare, felt a surge of fear, of dread. She had seen him fight, had witnessed his skill, his courage, but she also knew the dangers of war, the randomness of death. "Rhys," she said, her voice trembling, "be careful. Please." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and tenderness. He took her hand, holding it tightly. "I will, Isolde," he said. "I promise you. I will return." He cupped her face and, for the first time, he kissed her. Not a chaste peck, but a true kiss. Passionate, promising. He then turned and, with a heavy heart and a determined step, rode off to answer his king's call. The price of honor, Isolde knew, was often steep, paid in blood, in sacrifice, in separation. She watched him go, her heart aching, her future uncertain, praying for his safe return, praying for the day when they could finally be together, not as pawns in a game, but as husband and wife, as lovers, as equals. The war had begun, and their love, their fragile bond, would be tested to its limits. Chapter 16. Flames of Rebellion. The weeks that followed Rhys's departure were filled with anxiety and uncertainty. News from the front was scarce and unreliable. filtered through messengers who were often weary, wounded, and tight-lipped. Isolde spent her days managing the keep, overseeing the preparations for war, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy amidst the growing chaos. She found herself relying more and more on Alara, the young servant who had become her confidant, her friend. Alara was resourceful, intelligent, and loyal, a valuable ally in this strange and unsettling world. "The people are worried, my lady," Alara said one evening as they were walking in the gardens. "They fear for Lord Montrose, for the future of Blackwood." Isolde nodded, her own fears mirroring those of the people she had come to care for. "I know, Alara," she said, "but we must remain strong. We must show them that we have faith in Lord Montrose, in his ability to prevail." "But what if he doesn't?" Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Isolde stopped walking, her gaze fixed on a distant, snow-capped mountain. "Then we will face whatever comes," she said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her heart. "We will not surrender. We will not be defeated." She had learned that much from Rhys, from his unwavering determination, his refusal to yield, even in the face of overwhelming odds. She would channel his strength, his courage, his spirit. One afternoon, a messenger arrived, bearing a letter from Rhys. Isolde tore it open eagerly, her hands trembling, her heart pounding with anticipation. The letter was brief, written in his characteristic, concise style. He reported that the fighting was fierce, the enemy formidable, but that his forces were holding their own. He assured her that he was well, that he was taking every precaution to stay safe. He ended the letter with a personal note, a few words that sent a shiver down Isolde's spine. "I miss you, Isolde," he wrote. "I think of you constantly. You are my strength, my inspiration. I fight for you, for our future." Tears welled up in Isolde's eyes, tears of relief, of gratitude, of love. It was the first time he had openly expressed his feelings for her, the first time he had acknowledged their bond, their connection. She clutched the letter to her chest, her heart aching with longing for him, with fear for his safety. She would write back, she decided, pouring out her own feelings, her own hopes, her own love. But before she could do so, disaster struck. A small band of rebels, infiltrating the border, managed to breach the defenses of Blackwood Keep. They set fire to the stables, to the granary, creating chaos and confusion. Isolde, alerted by the commotion, rushed out of her chambers, her heart pounding with terror. She saw the flames, the smoke, the panicked faces of the servants and guards. "What is happening?" she cried, her voice barely a whisper. "Rebels, my lady," a guard shouted. "They have infiltrated the keep." Isolde felt a surge of adrenaline, of determination. She would not let them destroy Blackwood. She would not let them harm her people. "Gather the guards," she ordered, her voice clear and commanding. "Defend the keep. Protect the people." She grabbed a sword from a nearby wall, her hand instinctively finding the hilt, her fingers tightening around the grip. She had trained with Rhys, had learned the basics of swordplay, and now she would put that training to use. She plunged into the fray, her sword flashing in the firelight, her movements surprisingly swift and agile. She fought with a ferocity, a desperation that she did not know she possessed. She was defending her home, her people, her future. She encountered several rebels, engaging them in fierce combat. She was outnumbered, outmatched, but she refused to yield. She fought with the heart of a lioness, protecting her den, her cubs. She was wounded, a slash across her arm, but she barely felt the pain. She fought on, driven by adrenaline, by determination, by love for Rhys, for the life they had yet to build together. The fighting raged for what seemed like an eternity, the flames spreading, the smoke thickening, the screams of the wounded echoing through the keep. Finally, with the help of reinforcements from a nearby village, the rebels were repelled, driven back, defeated. Isolde, exhausted, wounded, but victorious, stood amidst the chaos, her sword dripping with blood, her body trembling with exhaustion. She had defended Blackwood. She had protected her people. She had proven herself a worthy leader, a true lioness. But the victory was bittersweet. The keep was damaged, the stables and granary destroyed, several guards and servants had been killed or injured. And Rhys was still at war, still in danger. The flames of rebellion had touched Blackwood, had tested Isolde's strength, her courage, her love. She had emerged victorious, but the war was far from over. And the future, their future, remained uncertain, shrouded in smoke and shadow. She had defended his home now. She could only pray for a safe return, so they could face the future, together. Chapter 17. A Knight's Confession. News of the attack on Blackwood Keep reached Rhys at the front lines, carried by a breathless messenger who had ridden day and night to deliver the urgent message. Rhys, upon hearing of Isolde's bravery, of her defense of his home, felt a surge of conflicting emotions, pride, fear, and a profound sense of love. He immediately requested leave from his commander, a grizzled veteran who understood the importance of family, of loyalty. He rode back to Blackwood, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread, his mind filled with images of Isolde, of her courage, her strength, her vulnerability. He arrived to find the keep still bearing the scars of the attack, the smoke still lingering in the air, the signs of battle evident everywhere. But he also found Isolde, alive, wounded, but unbroken. She was in her chambers, her arm bandaged, her face pale, but her eyes were filled with a fire, a determination that he had never seen before. He rushed to her, embracing her tightly, his relief overwhelming, his love for her overflowing. "Isolde," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Are you all right?" "I came as soon as I heard." She held him close, her body trembling against his. "I am fine, Rhys," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "We repelled them. We defended Blackwood." He pulled back slightly, his hands cupping her face, his eyes searching hers. He saw the weariness there, the pain, but also the strength, the resilience. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice filled with awe. "The messenger told me everything. You fought like a lioness, Isolde. You saved Blackwood." She smiled, a weak but genuine smile. "I did what I had to do," she said, "to protect our home, our people, our home." The words resonated with him, a confirmation of their bond, their connection, their shared future. He kissed her then, a long, passionate kiss that expressed all the emotions he had been holding back, all the love, all the fear, all the gratitude. He tended to her wounds, his touch gentle, his concern evident. He spoke of the war, of the battles he had fought, of the challenges he had faced. He confessed his fears, his doubts, his longing for her. "I thought I had lost you, Isolde," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "When I heard of the attack, I feared the worst." She took his hand, holding it tightly. "I am here, Rhys," she said. "I am not going anywhere." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a love that was no longer hidden, no longer restrained. It was a love born of respect, of admiration, of shared adversity. "I love you, Isolde," he said, his voice a whisper, but a whisper filled with conviction, with certainty. "I love you more than words can say." It was a confession, a declaration, that Isolde had longed to hear, but had never truly expected. She had earned his respect, his trust, but his love was a gift, a precious, unexpected gift. "I love you too, Rhys," she said, her voice trembling with emotion.
"I have loved you for a long time."
It was the truth, a truth that she had only recently admitted to herself, a truth that had been growing within her, slowly, steadily, despite the obstacles, despite the doubts, despite the betrayals. They spent the night together, talking, sharing their fears, their hopes, their dreams. They made love, a passionate, tender union that sealed their bond, their commitment, their love. But even in their shared intimacy, the shadow of war, of duty, loomed over them. Rhys knew he had to return to the front, to lead his men, to defend the realm. "I must go back, Isolde," he said, his voice filled with regret. "But I will return. I promise you." And when this war is over, we will build a life together, a future filled with peace, with happiness, with love. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears, but also with understanding. She knew the price of honor, the demands of duty. She would not ask him to stay, to abandon his men, his responsibilities. Go, Rhys, she said, her voice strong, despite the tremor in her heart. Fight for our realm, for our future. And come back to me, safe and sound. He kissed her one last time, a long, lingering kiss that spoke of promises, of commitment, of enduring love. Then, he mounted his horse and rode away, his figure disappearing into the dawn mist, leaving Isolde behind, to wait, to hope, to pray. The knight had confessed his love, but the battle was far from over. And their future, their happiness, hung precariously in the balance, dependent on his courage, his skill, and his fate. Chapter 18. The Serpent's Coil. While Rhys fought on the battlefield, Isolde faced a different kind of war at court. The king, increasingly paranoid and unstable, had summoned her, ostensibly to thank her for her bravery in defending Blackwood, but also to assess her loyalty, her influence. The court was a viper's nest, filled with ambitious nobles, scheming courtiers, and spies. Isolde knew that she was being watched, scrutinized, judged. Every word, every gesture, every interaction was fraught with danger. Lady Alara, in particular, seemed to be taking a special interest in Isolde's activities. She was always present, always watching, always smiling that same sweet, malicious smile. Lady Isolde, Alara said one afternoon, as they were walking in the palace gardens. You seem subdued. Are you worried about Lord Montrose? Isolde met her gaze, unflinching. I am concerned for his safety, of course, she said, her voice cool and polite, as any wife would be. Alara laughed, a light, tinkling laugh that grated on Isolde's nerves. Wife, she said. You are not yet married, Lady Isolde, and anything can happen in war. Isolde felt a prickle of irritation, but she kept her composure. I have faith in Lord Montrose's abilities, she said, her voice steady. Faith is a fragile thing, Lady Isolde, Alara said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Especially in these uncertain times. Loyalties shift, alliances crumble, and fortunes change. She paused, then added, I have heard whispers, Lady Isolde. Whispers about Lord Montrose's ambition. Whispers about his growing power. Isolde's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that there were rumors, suspicions, about Rhys's intentions. He was a powerful lord, a skilled warrior, and a potential threat to the king's authority. Lord Montrose is loyal to the crown, she said, her voice firm. Is he? Alara raised an eyebrow, her expression mocking. Or is he simply biding his time, waiting for the opportune moment to strike? She leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper. The king is weak, Lady Isolde. He is vulnerable. And there are those who believe that a stronger hand is needed to rule the realm. Isolde felt a chill run down her spine. Alara's words were treasonous, dangerous. But they also echoed her own unspoken fears. I do not believe Lord Montrose would ever betray the king, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But even as she spoke the words, she doubted their truth. Alara smiled, a knowing smile that sent a shiver of unease down Isolde's spine. Perhaps, Lady Isolde, she said. But be careful. You're playing a dangerous game, and you may find yourself on the losing side. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Isolde alone in the garden, her mind reeling, her heart filled with doubt and fear. The serpent had coiled itself around her, its venomous whispers poisoning her thoughts, her confidence, her trust in Rhys. She received a coded message from one of Rhys's loyal men, a warning. Beware the serpent, it read. She plots against you, against Lord Montrose. Trust no one at court. Isolde realized the truth then. Alara was not just a jealous rival, she was an enemy, a spy, working to undermine Rhys, to destroy them both. She was the serpent in the garden, the traitor in their midst. Isolde knew she had to act, to protect herself, to protect Rhys. She could not confront Alara openly, not without proof. She needed to be subtle, cunning, to play the game as skillfully as her enemy. She began to gather information, to observe, to listen. She discovered that Alara was in league with a faction of nobles who were plotting to overthrow the king, to install a new ruler, one who would be more amenable to their interests. And they saw Rhys, with his strength, his popularity, his ambition, as either a powerful ally or a dangerous obstacle. Alara's task was to determine which, and to act accordingly. Either win him over, or eliminate him. Isolde knew that Rhys would never betray the king, despite his reservations about his competence. He was a man of honor, of loyalty. But he was also a threat to the conspirators, and they would not hesitate to remove him, by any means necessary. She had to warn him, to protect him. But how? She could not send a message, not through the usual channels. It would be intercepted, exposed. She decided to take a risk, a desperate gamble. She would ride to the front herself, disguised as a simple messenger, carrying a coded message that only Rhys would understand. It was a dangerous plan, fraught with peril, but it was the only way. The serpent's coil was tightening, and Isolde knew that she had to strike back, to defend her love, her future, her life. The game was on, and she would play it to win, no matter the cost. Chapter 19. Where Shadows Meet. The journey to the front lines was arduous and dangerous. Isolde, disguised as a young male messenger, rode through treacherous terrain, avoiding patrols, bandits, and the ever-present threat of discovery. She pushed herself to her limits, driven by a desperate need to reach Rhys, to warn him of the plot against him. She traveled by night, resting during the day in hidden locations, her body aching, her mind racing. She ate sparingly, rationing her supplies, her focus solely on her mission. She encountered several close calls, narrowly avoiding capture by both rebel and royal forces, her disguise and her quick wit her only weapons. She relied on the kindness of strangers, on the assistance of a network of loyalists who supported Rhys, who recognized her, despite her disguise, as his betrothed. After days of relentless travel, she finally reached the outskirts of the royal encampment, a sprawling, chaotic city of tents, soldiers, and war. The smell of smoke, of sweat, of death, hung heavy in the air. She found her way to Rhys's tent, using a coded password provided by one of his loyal men. The guards, recognizing her, despite her disguise, allowed her entry. Rhys was surprised, shocked, to see her. He was in the midst of a strategy meeting with his commanders, but he dismissed them immediately, his concern for Isolde overriding all other considerations. "Isolde," he exclaimed, rushing to her, his eyes filled with disbelief and relief. "What are you doing here? It is too dangerous." She collapsed into his arms, exhausted, but also exhilarated. She had made it. She had reached him. "Rhys," she said, her voice trembling, "I had to come. I had to warn you." She told him everything, about Alara's treachery, about the plot against the king, about the danger he was in. She showed him the coded message, the warning from his loyal man. Rhys listened intently, his face grim, his eyes darkening with anger. He had suspected treachery, had sensed the shifting loyalties at court, but he had not known the full extent of the plot, the identity of the conspirators. "Alara," he said, his voice a low growl. "I should have known. She was always too ambitious, too cunning." He paused, then added, "Thank you, Isolde. You have saved my life, perhaps even the king's." He embraced her tightly, his gratitude overwhelming, his love for her shining in his eyes. "But you risked your own life to come here," he said, his voice filled with concern. "You could have been killed." "I had to, Rhys," she said, her voice firm. "I could not let them harm you. I could not let them destroy our future." He kissed her then, a long, passionate kiss that spoke of love, of gratitude, of shared danger. They spent the night together, planning, strategizing. They decided to expose the plot, to reveal Alara's treachery, to save the king, despite his weaknesses. Rhys would use his influence, his connections, to gather evidence, to rally support. Isolde would return to court, disguised once more, to act as his eyes and ears, to gather further information, to watch Alara. It was a dangerous plan, a risky gamble, but they had no other choice. They were fighting for their lives, for their love, for their future. The next morning, Isolde, once again disguised as a messenger, rode back to court, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew the dangers she faced, the risks she was taking, but she was prepared to face them, for Rhys, for their love, for their realm. She arrived back at court unnoticed, undetected. She immediately sought out Alara, finding her in the gardens, plotting with her fellow conspirators. Isolde, hidden in the shadows, listened intently, gathering evidence, memorizing names, faces, details. She learned the full extent of the plot, the timing of the planned coup, the identity of the new ruler they intended to install. It was a bold, audacious plan, and it was close to fruition. Isolde knew that she had to act quickly, to expose them, to stop them. But as she was about to leave, to send a message to Rhys, she was discovered. Alara, her eyes gleaming with malice, confronted her. Well, Alara said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Look what we have here. The little messenger boy. Or should I say Lady Isolde? Isolde felt a chill run down her spine. She had been betrayed, exposed. The serpent had struck, and this time, there was no escape. The shadows had met, and the battle was about to begin. A battle for survival, for love, for the fate of the realm. She was trapped, but she was not defeated. She would fight, one last time, for everything she held dear. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Love and Duty. Isolde stood frozen, Alara's words echoing in her ears like a death knell. She had been discovered, her disguise penetrated, her mission compromised. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained crumbled, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. So, the lioness plays at being a messenger, Alara purred, her voice laced with venomous amusement. A clever disguise, I must admit, but not clever enough. Isolde met her gaze, her own filled with a mixture of defiance and dread. She knew she was trapped, surrounded by Alara's allies, with no apparent means of escape. But she would not surrender. She would not betray Rhys. What do you want, Alara? Isolde asked, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her heart. Alara smiled, a cruel, predatory smile that sent a shiver down Isolde's spine. Want? My dear Isolde, I want it all. The throne, the power, and Lord Montrose's head on a pike. She stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with triumph. You were a fool to come back here. You should have stayed with your precious warlord. Now, you will both pay the price for your loyalty to a dying king. Isolde knew that Alara intended to kill her, to silence her, to prevent her from revealing the plot. But she would not go down without a fight. You will not succeed, Alara, Isolde said, her voice firm. Rhys will stop you. He will expose your treachery. Alara laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Rhys? He is a fool, blinded by his honor, his affection for you. He will be easily dealt with. She signaled to her guards, who moved to surround Isolde, their swords drawn, their faces grim. Take her, Alara ordered, and make sure she does not speak again. As the guards closed in, Isolde prepared to fight, knowing that her chances were slim, but determined to resist, to delay them, to hope for a miracle. But the miracle came, not in the form she expected, but in a form she recognized, a form she loved. Rhys, having anticipated Alara's treachery, had followed Isolde back to court, secretly, with a small contingent of his most trusted men. He had been waiting for the opportune moment to strike, to expose the plot, to save Isolde. He burst into the gardens, his sword drawn, his men at his back, their faces grim, their weapons ready. Alara! He roared, his voice echoing through the gardens. Your treachery is at an end. Alara and her conspirators were taken by surprise, their carefully laid plans disrupted, their confidence shattered. They turned to face Rhys, their expressions a mixture of shock and fear. Montrose. Alara hissed, her voice filled with hatred. You were supposed to be at the front. I am where I need to be, Alara, Rhys said, his voice cold and deadly. Protecting my betrothed and defending my king. A fierce battle erupted, the clash of steel echoing through the gardens, the cries of the wounded and dying filling the air. Rhys fought with a ferocity, a skill that Isolde had witnessed before, but this time it was fueled by something more than duty, more than honor. It was fueled by love, by rage, by a desperate need to protect her. Isolde, freed from her captors, joined the fight, her own sword flashing in the sunlight. She fought beside Rhys, their movements synchronized, their purpose aligned. They were a team, a force to be reckoned with, their love for each other a shield against the dangers that surrounded them. The battle raged for what seemed like an eternity, the outcome uncertain, the stakes impossibly high. Finally, with a combination of skill, courage, and luck, Rhys and Isolde prevailed. Alara and her conspirators were defeated, captured, their plot exposed, their treachery revealed. The king, shaken but alive, thanked Rhys and Isolde for their loyalty, for their bravery. He ordered the arrest of the remaining conspirators, promising swift and brutal justice. Rhys and Isolde, wounded but victorious, stood side by side, their hands clasped tightly, their love for each other a beacon of hope amidst the chaos and destruction. The reckoning had come, the price of honor paid, the serpent's coil broken. Love and duty had intertwined, had been tested, had triumphed. They had faced betrayal, danger, death, and had emerged stronger, more united, more in love. The future was still uncertain, but they would face it together, as husband and wife, as partners, as equals. Their journey had been long and arduous, but it had led them to this moment, to this victory, to this enduring love. Epilogue. The wedding of Lord Rhys Montrose and Lady Isolde of Ashenmere was a grand affair, a celebration of love, of loyalty, of resilience. The scars of war, of betrayal, were still fresh, but they were overshadowed by the joy of the occasion, by the promise of a new beginning. The ceremony took place in the great hall of Blackwood Keep, the very place where Isolde had first pleaded for her father's life, where she had struck a desperate bargain with the beast. But the beast was gone, replaced by the man she loved, the man who had fought for her, who had risked everything for her. Isolde, dressed in a gown of white silk, embroidered with the black wolf of House Montrose and the silver falcon of House Ashenmere, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her heart filled with a happiness she had never thought possible. Rhys, standing at the altar, his eyes shining with love and admiration, watched her approach, his heart swelling with pride, with gratitude, with a profound sense of peace. He had faced death, had overcome treachery, had won his bride. They exchanged vows, their voices clear and strong, their promises heartfelt and enduring. They were bound together, not by force, not by circumstance, but by choice, by love, by a shared destiny. The feasting and celebrations that followed were joyous and unrestrained, a testament to the relief, the gratitude, the hope that filled the hearts of all present. The people of Blackwood, the people of Ashenmere, rejoiced in the union of their two houses, in the promise of peace and prosperity that it represented. Years passed, and their love deepened, their bond strengthened. They ruled Blackwood together, wisely and justly, earning the respect and loyalty of their people. They faced challenges, yes, but they faced them together, always together, their love a constant source of strength and inspiration. They had children, a son and a daughter, who inherited the best qualities of both their parents, their strength, their courage, their compassion. The children grew, learning the ways of the world, learning the importance of honor, of duty, of love. Isolde never forgot the journey she had taken, the trials she had endured, the love she had found. She remembered the fear, the desperation, the betrayal, but she also remembered the courage, the resilience, the triumph. She often visited the hidden chamber, the place where she had discovered Lyra's letters, the place where she had first understood the depth of Rhys's pain, the source of his reserve. She would read the letters, her heart aching for the young woman who had lost everything, for the man who had been left behind. But she also knew that Rhys had moved on, that he had found happiness with her. He had honored Lyra's memory, but he had also embraced the future, a future filled with love, with laughter, with life. One evening, as she and Rhys were sitting by the fire in their private chambers, she asked him about the past, about his decision to force her into marriage. "Rhys," she said, her voice hesitant, "do you regret it? Do you regret the way you acquired me?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a tenderness that time had not diminished. He took her hand, holding it tightly. "Isolde," he said, his voice soft, "I regret the pain I caused you, the fear I instilled in you. But I do not regret the outcome. I do not regret finding you, loving you, marrying you." He paused, then added, "I did what I believed was necessary at the time. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps there was another way. But I would do it all again, if it meant having you by my side." Isolde smiled, her heart filled with a love that was both profound and enduring. She knew that he spoke the truth, that he had acted out of a desperate need, a flawed sense of duty, but also out of a burgeoning love that he had not yet recognized. "I know, Rhys," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "And I forgive you. I understand." They embraced, their love a silent testament to the journey they had taken, the obstacles they had overcome, the happiness they had found. They had started as adversaries, had become allies, had ended as lovers, as soulmates, as equals. The beast had been tamed, not by force, but by love, by understanding, by forgiveness. And the lioness had found her home, her mate, her destiny, in the heart of the wolf. Their love story, born of darkness and despair, had blossomed into a tale of end.